Hello everyone, welcome back to another deck profile with me, Chocobilly. This week I'm going to be looking at my Ice Wind profile, which is not a standard kind of storm deck. It's very much focusing on discard and removing from the break zone. So, as you can imagine, with the advent of Opus 23, I'm going to be looking at how we can best utilize something like Zenos. So, when Zenos enters the field, choose the 2 forwards in your opponent's break zone, remove them from the game, and then when a card in your opponent's break zone leaves the break zone, your opponent discards one card. This effect will only trigger once per turn. But it's a really effective card because if your opponent Kusiths their break zone and that card leaves the break zone, then they have to discard as well. So it completely mitigates that kind of card coming to hand, unless of course it's for S ability or something like that, right? But it kind of, this can trigger on your opponent's turn as well as your turn. It has an entry effect as well, which is quite nice. Obviously, it's very easy to be killed, and Zenos is one of those forwards that never sticks around very long because ultimately he's 7k, so it's pretty easy to kill. And he just has such a potent effect that if your opponent leaves him just leaves him on the field unchecked, then they're not going to have a very fun time. Anyway, I will start with the backups. And then move from right to left. So backups, summons, monsters, and then forwards. So first up with the backups, obviously we want to start with an Amina because Amina gets your class 9th Moogle, which means that turn 1 Amina straight into class 9th, you then have both the elements that you require. If you have a class 9th in hand, then Edward or Unalaska are solid second choices. Edward for obvious reasons because you want to be utilizing him alongside the Zenos, and he's just a generally really good card as well. Just even if you're not comboing him with Zenos and you're just removing something from your opponent's break zone every turn is really, really nice. Unalaska, for obvious reasons, again, you're an ice, you're discarding, you want to make your opponent discard, but Unalaska is ultimately probably the easiest way to make your opponent discard every turn, because backups are kind of harder to hit anyway, but just that constant, basically 3 CP, you're discarding a card, plus the Dulling Unalaska to make your opponent discard a card is a pretty good play for you, and that then combos nicely into something like Edward. You make your opponent discard a card, you can then remove said card from their game. And then class 9th Moogle as well. And then Nero, because obviously you've got Vice in here. If there's discard and it's ice, there's going to be Vice. I've only got 2 Nero though, because I didn't want to throw too many of him in the deck when there's a pretty decent portion of backups, and also we have some wind backups as well. But 2 EX Nero, 3 Vice. That's a pretty good setup in my opinion. So, White Mage, Thief, and Clavart. So Clavart, obviously, just nice little 1 CP wind backup. Playable if you need it. If not, just get rid of it. But it's just nice if you do get that class 9th Moogle down. You just got that 1 CP just to be able to use for Clavart. Worth doing. Evray to activate the backup to then just play Clavart is really good. Thief. So, pay a wind and dull. Put Thief into the break zone. Your opponent reveals their hand. Select 1 character card from their hand. Your opponent discards this card. You can only use ability during your turn. So, obviously, Thief does have some discard abilities, and Thief is one of them, which is a card that never really got played. But making it so that your opponent discards a card or a character card from their hand. So it might be a case of you're fearful of an S ability, you know they've got something back to hand, you can Thief to try and get rid of that card. If it forces that hand to use that card earlier than they wanted, then that's not the end of the world. Obviously, you can only use Thief on your turn, so you have to bear that in mind. But ultimately, if you are able to look at said card and say, no, I don't want that, get rid of it, and then combo that again with Edward or something, then you are able to remove that from the game as well. So potentially, you can Thief to take a card out of your opponent's hand, put it into the break zone. You can Edward to remove that card, to trigger Zenos, to make your opponent discard another card. If you've got Vice on the field, you then, or you get to dull and freeze a character for both Thief and Zenos' effect as well. So there's all these great little combos that just completely annihilate your opponent's field and hand at the same time. White Mage. This is a really underrated card, and I really, really like it. When it enters the field, just choose a card in your opponent's break zone, remove it from the game. That's really good. It's just an entry effect. It's simple as that, but really, the actual just pay 1, put White Mage into the break zone, choose a card in your opponent's break zone, remove from the game is fantastic, because even if you got all your backups down, most people forget about cards like this where they have a payment cost, but it doesn't actually require that card to be dulled for that. So your opponent might look at your break zone, or your backup line, and see everything done, and be like, oh, it's fine, I don't have to worry about anything. They go to get something from their break zone, you respond by discarding a card to break White Mage to get rid of that card. Now that obviously might seem like a lot because you're overpaying, you're using white mage for, or sorry, you're discarding a card and you're breaking it back up, so it's quite a bit, but 9 times out of 10, if your opponent's getting something from the break zone, it's going to be something they really want to be able to combo with or utilize, so it's generally in your favour. And, you know, or you could just have every standard backup. That doesn't have to be a backup. It doesn't have to be white mage, obviously. It can be any backup. It can be Glavart. They see an active Glavart, not scared of anything. You then dull Glavart to put white mage into the break zone to remove something. So yeah, fantastic. Evray is a really, really effective card. I would actually consider putting this up to 2, because there are so many good utilizations of Evray. Being able to Edward on your turn, stand Edward back up, and then using Edward on your opponent's turn when you have a control of a Zenos means that you can make them discard on their turn as soon as they create a stack, provided they have a card in hand, remove something from the break zone. They then discard a card. Now, the one thing to bear in mind with this whole interaction is sometimes it's actually better not to use Edward, because you always have to be fearful of the fact that you know your opponent, depending on what your opponent's playing, obviously, if they need to get something back from their break zone and they go to pass turn, you can obviously at the end of their turn say, okay, I'm going to dull Edward to make you remove that card. Now, if you've got Zenos, probably worth it. If you don't, I'd actually be mindful of not doing that, because of the fact that they can then respond with, okay, well, now they got rid of that card in my break zone, what I'm actually going to do is discard this big 6 CP forward in the break zone to play Leonis to play back that 6 CP forward to then get something from my deck or my break zone or whatever. So actually leaving that Edward there just as a threat is enough, because it's stopping your opponent from doing stuff. And even though the temptation is really there to be able to make your opponent lose something in their break zone on their turn, that probably them passing a turn is actually bait just for you to Edward. You obviously have to be mindful of what your opponent's actually playing. If there isn't too much recursion, then probably go for it. But if they're mono earth or something like that, then actually just let them pass turn. Don't use Edward. Go into your turn. It's a waste of an Edward potentially, but it means that they're not then playing huge things onto the field. So, you know, you win some, you lose some. And that's why using something like Evray is so important, because being able to use Edward once on your turn to remove something anyway, and then standing back up ready for your opponent's turn, just as that threat there, is very, very good. Obviously, you could throw Tomos into the deck as well to be able to cast 2 things, reactivate 2 backups, but I didn't want to focus too much on that, because I always find I did have a breed of this deck where I had 1 Evray and 1 Atomos, and this deck isn't actually your standard sort of Storm deck where you want to keep on playing loads of things. It's a case of actually more using abilities than playing lots of things. So there were some turns where I'd play one thing and then not play anything else. And obviously Atomus got a fantastic ability when it attacks, you can activate things, but still didn't really ever get to that point. So yeah, I actually think I prefer Evray over Atomus in this state. And then similarly, just Unalesca, if you want to activate it, just have it there ready. Well, actually, you can't use it again anyway, so it doesn't matter. I don't know why I'm saying that. But yeah, White Mage, Thief you can't use on your opponent's turn, so don't need to worry about that, but they might forget that, so stand it back up, make your opponent scared of it. White Mage, and yeah, Edward, just having all those cards active is very, very useful. Right, Shiva, so this should actually be a 2 of in this deck. I don't know why I've only got 1. Really effective. Just choose a character, dull it and freeze it. If you pay the extra cost, return Shiva to its owner's hand. Remove 4 cards from your break zone to do so. Just doing that a couple of times is great. It's just a really good card, and ice, it doesn't matter if you're mono ice or not. As long as you've got enough ice cards, I'd say if you're 2/3 of your deck is ice, even if just half your deck is ice, just run this card because it's so good. Asura, so I ran the new Asura just because I wanted to see realistically what it was like, but actually it's not bad in the case of you want to be able to stand things up, to block, to just move things out of the way. If you're running something like Maria, which has a good death effect, then actually running Asura isn't the worst thing either. Obviously, it's also a bit of a tech play, make it so things can't be bounced, make it so power can't be reduced either. So it's basically an anti-Leviathan card. Again, running it because I just wanted to see how it worked, but yeah. Depending, I mean, I don't really have that many I don't have any dull abilities, I don't think, in my forwards. So in that case, it probably is better to run the other Asura backup to activate all your backups again, to then, you know, or just to be able to get something back to your hand, get your Maria back to hand, which is the only 2 CP forward, to get your White Mage back to hand, and then be able to replay that, and just activate all your backups, activate a couple of forwards, whatever. Yeah, this Asura was a nice little tech play if you're in the right matchup, but I wasn't ever in the right matchup. Also, if you're able to set up quick enough against water, being able to make it so that you're removing cards from their break zone anyway, so that Lena, unless they get Lena down really early, at which point you just try and kill her through something. Provided they don't get Lena down too early, you can start removing those cards from the break zone anyway, so, you know, not the end of the world. Chokebow, it's Chokebow, protect your cards, get them back to hand. Shiva, this has got a bit of a tech play, so this should be a 1-of and this should be a 2-of, basically. Let's edit this now, actually. So 1, there we go. I'll come back to the Shiva in a second. And then this Shiva, because it's an EX burst, it gets to free something, but also stops you from receiving damage as well. Had a funny interaction with one of my friends, not me personally, but in our play group, where the damage it deals to a forward becomes 0 actually made a difference. And that was against Behemoth K. When it attacks, it does 1 point of damage to your opponent. Hit the Shiva as the EX burst for that, and then obviously they've got the attack on the stack, but the next damage it deals, or the damage it deals to your opponent, becomes 0, so actually it didn't deal that second point of damage. So there are use cases for something like this, but ultimately EX burst to stop something from dealing damage, or from attacking, blocking, whatever. Really good. This Shiva, so choose a forward if it deals damage other than battle damage to a forward. This turn, the damage becomes 0 instead, so similar in a way to the Shiva. But again, really good if you're up against a board wipe, so something like, I don't know, Limit Break Ace, or the Demon, or Genova. Shiva, make it so that it doesn't deal the damage, well, outside of battle damage, and then they try to do their board wipes. That's nice. But this also has a bit of a tech play, which is choose one dull forward of cost 2 or less to break it. Your opponent discards 1 card. Now, this is funny because normally cards that interact with a forward will interact with, if they interact with the player as well, they will interact with the owner of that card. This card, however, simply states choose one dull forward of cost 2 or less, break it. Your opponent discards 1 card. So the stupid tech play here is Maria. So when Maria is put from the field into the break zone, select one of the 2 following actions. Your opponent reveals their hand, select 1 card from their hand, your opponent discards this card, or activate all the characters you control. So let's say hypothetically your opponent goes to attack, they think they've got game, you can cast Shiva to break your Maria to activate all your characters and make them discard a card, because Shiva simply states a character, choose one forward of 2 CP or less, that's dull, break it, your opponent discards a card. Or you could obviously make your opponent discard a card through Maria as well. So Shiva, break the Maria, opponent discards a card, Maria, discard it, or look at your hand, discard a card, which is just hilarious. I love that little tech play. And then, yeah, moving on to the forwards. So Maria, I've already gone over it. You can search off Amina as well, which is nice if you want to get yourself some wind to play a backup, or just find, you know, color fix for the wind, so that's useful. It's a shame that she is only on death, but again, with the Shiva, it's quite nice. Just if you want to attack through her, your opponent looks at him and is like, no, I don't want you activating any things or discarding a card. So she's actually quite a force to be reckoned with. A force to be reckoned with in that case. Again, the one problem is when you're playing up against something like water, because you want her to be broken, but if your opponent's just bouncing it back to hand, then it's kind of crap. So that is the one case where maybe this Asura makes sense, because you don't want her to be bounced. You don't want her power. Well, her power being reduced is fine actually, because she still breaks, still get the effect, but still. I quite enjoyed running this card, and in some niche situations, actually quite fun. Zidane, so enters the field, opponent reveals a hand, you get to make your opponent discard a card from that hand. Works nicely with Vice, with Nero, with whatever. It's a card that hasn't seen play for a long time, but that doesn't make it any worse. It also comes to 7k potentially as well, if they have 2 cards less in their hand, which again, in this sort of deck, isn't too hard to do. Sephiroth, so when he enters the field, your opponent discards a card, or you can pay 1 ice and 2, remove Sephi from your hand from the game, choose one dot forward, break it. Again, you can use that with Maria, so if your Maria attacked, they didn't block it because they don't want the effect, that's fine. Go to your opponent's turn, they go to attack, you then use Sephi's effect to break your Maria, you then get all your characters back potentially, which means that actually Sephi hasn't cost you anything to be removed, which is great, hopefully, anyway. And then you maybe block with another forward, or, you know, obviously you could just break your opponent's forward as well that's attacked, but potentially it might be that they're attacking with something small. You can stand, I don't know, Y'shtola back up or something like that, block with that instead. You know, there's various different means here, but being able to break your own Maria is quite fun. And yeah, just being able to break something like a summon could is really, really good for the Sephi. Enters the field, discard, again, really good. General Leo. So I again was just kind of testing out this card, but actually it's pretty good. Now I don't have a huge amount of 2CP forwards, but I've got a fair amount of 2CP backups. So his effect was generally always online when I played him. But yeah, having a forward Edgar, basically, to play a 2CP forward or a 2CP character onto the field is so good. Yeah, and just a 7k body that just plays something onto the field. If he were like 5CP, or 5k, sorry, that went up to 7CP, that would maybe kind of make sense, but now it's a 7k that becomes a 9k and can't be chosen by summons. That's bonkers. Yeah, really, really good card. Really liked playing it. Don't know if it fits in this sort of deck, but a deck where you're probably playing a fair few monsters actually might make a bit more sense. Or things that can't be cast, potentially, as well. That's actually something. So in the first iteration of this deck, I think his name was Drautos. So he can only be cast if your opponent has one card or less in hand, something like that. But he's a 2CP Ice Brave AK. So generally we could just play him onto the field. But yeah, I generally like General Leo. Kadaj. So this is where things get a bit janky. So obviously I mentioned before about the fact that you can use Edward to remove things from your opponent's break zone on their turn, at which point you then get to make your opponent discard a card if you've got Zenos on the field. But if you've got Kadaj entering at the end of your opponent's turn every time, then you can remove 2 things from your opponent's break zone, which will then trigger Zenos, which will then make them discard a card, which is horrible, because Kadaj is one of those cards which is really hard to target because of the fact that when he enters the field, it's the end turn, which means you cannot respond to it, which means his effect will keep on happening. And obviously, they can kill him on your turn. You know, you go to attack phase, they then deal 10k to Kadaj, he dies, whatever. You know, that just happens. But being able to have it so that Kadaj keeps on coming in, keeps on removing things from your opponent's break zone, and keeps on making them discard through Zenos as well is just, horrible, but funny. Shantoto, again, I'm a massive fan of cards or forwards that also act as summons, being able to pay to a crystal, dull all your opponent's forwards out of the way, really, really useful effect. You're making your opponent discard a lot, so there's a good chance that you'll be able to play Shantoto onto the field for only 1 CP as well, so again, pretty useful. More standard ice discard stuff, right? Vice, freezing things out, you've got a lot of discard, and actually wind quite heavily helps with that as well. Like I said, the Thief and the Zidane as well is quite funny. Melvian, again, a really, really good card. Freezing up opponent's backups whilst reactivating your own means that you can obviously pay the 4 backups, leave your Edward open, choose to reactivate the Edward, dull the Edward to remove something from the break zone, yada, yada, yada. Rufus, again, standard good ice, discard a card, freeze something out of the way. There aren't any Turks in the deck, so you're not going to get a reduced cost or be able to play something back to your hand, but ultimately, just having him enter the field and discard a card is disgusting, so yeah, pretty good. Y'shtola, discard, she can kill things. Ice doesn't have much of anything that can kill things, so worth running her. Dorgan, this was quite a fun card to run actually, so again, kind of like the Atomos, I never really found myself in a position where I cast enough cards to get his extra effect off. But I never really also found myself in a position where I would need more than 2 of his effects, or more than 1 of his effects. So, enter the field, choose 1. If cast 3 or more, select up 2 of the 3. So, choose 1 forward of cost 5 or more, remove from the game. That didn't happen very often. Choose 1 monster, remove it from the game. That did happen quite often. Or choose 2 cards from either player's break zone, remove them from the game, draw 1 card. That also happened. So yeah, obviously works nicely with Zenos, but also draws you a card. So not only is it removing things from your opponent's break zone, and then if you've got Zenos on the field, making them discard, you're also drawing a card as well. So you're getting quite a bit of value out of that. But I only have 1 in the deck because ultimately he never felt that much value, and his best value is when you've got Zenos on the field. Removing things from the break zone is just perfectly fine anyway, but you know, it depends. If there's nothing really good in the break zone, then it's fine. It's just an 8k really. You get to draw a card potentially, 2CP 8k, but monsters, they have to be in the right deck, and forwards, again, they have to have big enough forwards, so if you're playing up against a Hythe deck or something, then potentially, but you can't guarantee that. Zenos, yeah, just Zenos is fantastic. He's a lot of fun to play with, but he never sticks around, so find means of keeping him sticking around. I'm in wind. I could have put a lot more in here to actually keep him alive. You know, you've got the Opus 22 Alexander to redirect damage. There's a little 1 CP White Mage to make so they reduce damage. You know, there's lots out there. I do have the Chocobo, but ultimately, he will very rarely stick around. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't play him, because just playing him means that he becomes a core focus of your opponent. If you can play him in a turn where you can then just annihilate your opponent's hand, so let's say you've got Unalesco on the backup line, you've got Zenos, and, I don't know, something else. Zenos, removed from the break zone, make your opponent discard a card, and also it's worth noting that you play Zenos onto the field, you choose up to 2 forwards in your opponent's break zone. So you can choose only one. They might only have one in the break zone, and you choose only the one. Obviously, if they have no forwards in the break zone, you can't choose anything, so then you can't make your opponent discard a card. So that kind of sucks. But still, if you, say, play Zenos onto the field, choose one forward in your opponent's break zone, they respond with Amaterasu, you can then respond with Darling Edward to make your opponent, to remove something from your opponent's break zone, at which point they then have to discard for that as well. So it's still worth playing, I think. Anima, Icon of Icons. 1 me a game. Ultimately, it's just a really nice push. Now, obviously, it does on freezes everything on your opponent's field, which is pretty brutal, but it's only that good for, like, a turn, really. So, comboing that with Kurosame is really good. So, you're locking things down with Anima, and then keeping things locked down with Kurosame the turn after, potentially, something like that. Yeah, just, it's such an effective card. Ice really needed something like this, where it's like, right, I've made you lose your hand, now I'm going to lock everything down. It's really unfun to play against. But Ice that's just Ice's game plan, unfortunately. It's just horrible to play against, but that's what it's got, and I'm glad that this got something like that. Also, I really like the artwork. I think it's pretty cool. Like, I like 10, I like 14. What else? There was something else I wanted to say about Icon. Yeah, obviously it's not that important. And then finally Kurosame. Kurosame, really, really good card. Probably could take that up to 2 because of the S ability alone. Just S, choose on forward, deal at 9,000 damage. Doesn't have to be a dull forward, doesn't matter what it is. Just S, 9k. Job done. And then limit breaks. 3 Sergei, because Sergei's really, really good. Victora's also really, really good as well. Sid Highwind, just in case you need to that backup. Turn 1, that's really it. And Kuja. So, nothing out of the ordinary for the limit breaks. Kind of limited in what you can put. Maybe, if you really wanted to, you could put something like Death Gaze in case you come up against a 5 CP forward and you just want that instant break. But realistically, it's quite expensive. It's not very big. And it's a very niche amount of forwards to be able to break for that. So, yeah, not great. So, Sid Highwind, if you do end up bricking, even with 16 backups, maybe worth throwing in there. And that is... Whoa! Zooming in, apparently. What's going on? I'm sorry, guys. What's happened? I'm using my wife's Mac, and you can zoom in with your mouse, apparently. I want to go back. Well, thanks, guys, for watching. I'm gonna just cry now and work out what the hell's going on. But yeah, really like the style of deck. I really like Zenos. I think he's a fun card. This is kind of like the best sort of thing I can think of him working in. Obviously, you've got Lightning as well with things like Albert and Irvine, which can remove things from the break zone as well. Again, really good with that. But realistically, I mean, you've got Earth, actually. Things like Kryl, targeting someone's opponent's break zone. No, I went over that before. That doesn't work because she casts it from the break zone, and then when it's cast, it then goes to the stack, and then it gets removed from the game. So that doesn't work. But you've got Mist Dragon, so, that's something. But yeah, Zenos... Really fun card. Can I scroll over to Zenos, please? Yes. Where is he? Whoa, that's Vice. Hello, Vice. You down somewhere? Where are you? Da 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 da. There we are. Oh, pretty anima. There we are. Zenos, man of the hour. Yeah, I think his effects are really, really good. And just a constant oppression. In the right matchup, you can get screwed. But in the right matchup, you can just completely trounce your opponent. So yeah. Lots of fun. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. Stay safe, be lucky, and I'll see you in the next video.